Mohamed Amin never left his camera.
The fact that he could shoot both video and still simultaneously, to me, to this day, is still astonishing.
During my wedding day, I was on the street covering riot because he told me wedding can wait, but news can't wait.
I don't feel happy doing assignments like these, filming people dying. You just see this and you feel this is going to get the message across stronger.
An archive of more than 4 million images. Still and moving. It's a story of Africa, a celebration of its wonders, and a chronicle of its wars.
Mr. Prime Minister, these constitutional instruments,
A record of its finest hours, and of its utter follies. The archive is almost entirely the work of one man, Mohamed Amin, described as Africa's greatest photojournalist. In a career spanning 4 decades, he covered almost every major news story on the continent, chalking up scoop upon scoop upon scoop.
Mohamed Amin was able to scoop every journalist. I think for 3 reasons, 3 major reasons. One, simple enough, Mohamed Amin never left his camera. Wherever he went, you saw Mohamed Amin with a camera. His camera was with him, I think, in the toilet, everywhere. Secondly, he was a born journalist. He knew when he saw an event that this would be a major event. And the third reason, I think, why he scooped other journalists, he knew what constituted a good, newsworthy picture. Not only did he know that this is an event, but within the event, he knew that that particular happening needs to be captured.
For Mohamed, or Mo as he became known, getting the story first was not just a goal, it was an obsession.
He wanted to be first. He always wanted to have the scoop. He wanted to be the only one with the pictures, and there are many, many incidences that I heard of from other journalists where they say, you know, he used extremely unethical methods in order to make sure that nobody else got the story except him.
He was a force of nature, if you like, in pursuit of a story or a picture. He was a tsunami and nothing would stand in his way.
If anybody came close to even getting onto what he called his patch, then he would even explode even more.
Mo expected the same commitment to the job from those who worked for him.
During my wedding day, I was on the street covering riot because he told me wedding can wait, but news can't wait. So we were with him on the street, running up and down. Suddenly, during lunch hour, he said, okay, now we are on break, we can go back to your place and have a fun. So we went back there, and then I put on my suit and we start celebrating with the guests. And then after 1 hour, he said, let's go back to work.
The determination and focus that were to earn Mo fame as Africa's greatest photojournalist were with him from his early days. He was born in 1943 in Eastleigh, a deprived area of the Kenyan capital Nairobi. His father was a poor railway engineer of Indian descent. Mo was the second of his 7 children.
I come from a very poor family, and I was never born on a bed of roses. I've gone through, grown by eating charcoal from gutters and so on and so forth. That I don't know if that is the reason. Perhaps that is something in me that tries to get the message across more strongly, trying to understand other people's suffering.
In the early 1950s, his father's job took the family to Dar es Salaam, commercial capital of the then British-ruled Tanganyika, now Tanzania. Mo was obsessed with photography even as a boy. He saved up for 2 years to buy his first camera, a box Brownie, at the age of 11. At school, he was an active member of the photographic club and spent his spare time snapping student activities. Showing a canniness with money for which he was later to become well known, he sold the pictures to his friends at a profit. So sure was Mo of his chosen career that at 19, much to his parents' horror, he quit school and set himself up as a freelance photographer. He called his fledgling company Camera Pics. It was now the early 1960s, and there was no shortage of news events to cover.
The winds of change were sweeping through the continent. There was the end of the colonial rule. African leaders were taking over their countries. There wasn't much international media presence here, so being a local African allowed him to actually get access to places and to people that I don't think anyone else would have gotten access to.
Mo's very first scoop took him off the mainland coast to the spice island of Zanzibar, where there were rumours of a coup. The island's airport had been closed, but this was no deterrent to the resourceful Mo. He hitched a ride on a dhow and was the first to take pictures of John Okello, who led the Zanzibar Revolution in 1964. Back in Zanzibar the following year, he got an even more sensational scoop. Pictures of a secret military training camp with advisors from what was then the Soviet Union and East Germany. The images made news worldwide, but landed Mo in Zanzibar's notorious Kilimamigugu prison. It's said he cried just 3 times in his life, and the first time was here.
He was 22 years old. He had just started his career. It was almost a baptism of fire for him. He was beaten, he was tortured. It was a really bad experience for him. He lost 28 pounds in weight in 28 days. It was the defining point in his life, I think, where he could have just given up this profession and gone and done something else. But instead, I think it hardened him and made him more determined.
After his release from prison, Mo was deported. He headed back to the Kenyan capital, where he started afresh to build up his business.
The fact that he could shoot both video and still simultaneously, to me, to this day, is still astonishing. In his early days, he used to work for different agencies and not tell those agencies that he was working for their rivals, but he obviously couldn't send them the same picture. So he would, again, rig up this contraption that would take the same picture but from different angles. So it looked like there were 3 photographers there as opposed to just him. So he could sell the same picture to 3 different people and make 3 times the amount of money.
He was tough to negotiate with. When he brought his pictures, he wanted those pictures bought at a certain price. There you saw somebody who was uncompromising. He knew the quality of his work, and he wanted a price for his pictures that went far, 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 far above the normal accepted prices we were paying for pictures at that time.
But it was not all work and no play for the ambitious young photographer. In Tanzania, he'd met Dolly Kaki, sister of one of his friends and a fashion designer and model. Romance blossomed.
And these pictures are all taken by Mohamed Amin. This was my first picture he took in the fashion show, first picture of mine. Amin was not very good looking, or he was not a handsome boy, but I thought he had a very good personality. He was charming. That's how I fell in love with him.
But there was a problem. Mo was from an Orthodox Muslim family. Dolly was an Ismaili, one of the Aga Khan's followers.
My family did not like that I should get married with Amin, because they thought that he's not right for me. But I was in love with him. We were so much in love with each other.
The young couple continued to meet, and in October 1968, during one of Dolly's regular visits to Mo in Nairobi, they were married in secret. 2 years later, their son Salim was born.
I delivered Salim in Nairobi hospital. Same day or second day, he went on a job.
In the years that followed Mo's return to Kenya, events in Africa continued to make headlines, and he made sure he was never far from the fray. His pursuit of news took him across the continent, from Nigeria in the west to the tiny island of Mauritius off the southeast coast. But it was back on his home turf in Nairobi that he was to get the next major exclusive of his career. On July the 5th, 1969, Kenyan politician Tom Mboya, tipped by many as a successor to the then president Jomo Kenyatta, was gunned down as he left a pharmacy in the city centre. Thanks to a tip-off and the speed of his response, Mo and his cameras were on the scene within minutes. An hour or so later, he was at the offices of the Nation newspaper.
So here comes Mohamed Amin, sweating, I remember, and he was offering the editor exclusive pictures. And when we looked at those pictures, it was impossible for us to believe what kind of pictures they were. They show Tom Mboya dying. It so happens that Mohamed Amin, after hearing Tom Mboya was shot, rushed to the scene, and before they took Tom Mboya to Nairobi Hospital, they obviously put him in an ambulance, and Mohamed Amin got in that ambulance. So he was taking pictures of Tom Mboya as they were trying to revive him. He was then almost unconscious, but he was not dead. And so all the efforts those people were making to revive Tom Mboya were captured. A very dramatic series of pictures.
The images secured Mo's reputation as a photojournalist of note and won him his very first Cameraman of the Year award. He'd achieved another coup, but more exclusives were soon to follow. In 1971, Idi Amin hit the headlines when he seized power in Uganda in a military coup.
The next big story was Idi Amin and his reign of terror. How he got to know him was a funny story in the sense that he, like every other journalist, wanted to get into Uganda when they heard about the fall of Milton Obote, and called up State House in Kampala and got the operator and said, you know, in his usual, dad's usual style, you know, let me speak to General Amin. And the operator's asking, well, you know, who are you? And he said, well, I'm Mohamed Amin. And the operator just put him straight through to Idi, and I think the operator just assumed that it was a relative. And Dad ended up forming this interesting relationship with Idi. I wouldn't say it was a friendship, because I don't think Idi was anyone's friend, but it was a good acquaintance, it was a good connection.
This good connection gave Mo unique access to Idi Amin's private world. But it also enabled him to reveal the shocking brutality of the so-called Butcher of Uganda. Making sure he wasn't named as the photographer who took these images, he exposed the mass murders and torture that took place during Idi Amin's 8-year rule. Connections were the key to many of Mo's successes. He made a point of knowing people in all the right places.
He had that list of very impressive contacts, and the people Mohamed Amin knew mattered. And doors opened for him. No matter what you say about him, whether you say he was not a very likable person, doors opened, and the doors that opened for Mohamed Amin are the doors that matter, and they led to news.
As Mo's work became increasingly known to editors around the world, commissions flowed in. Working alone, he was no longer able to cope with the number of assignments. He took on a small staff, and camera picks grew.
In the initial days, I mean, everyone was petrified. Mohammed, he would scream, shout, curse, swear. Right? He had absolutely no respect for anybody. But in my opinion, this was the best way you'd actually get to learn, because you had to be sharp.
As well as cameraman, he was the company accountant and office manager. No job was too great or too small.
Amin used to work, he started work at home at around 2 a.m. And then at 6 o'clock he will go to the office, and then he will stay there up to like 8, 9 at night.
That was every day, Sundays, holidays, Christmas Day. There was no holiday. Never took a holiday. Even if we went to the coast or we went somewhere for a vacation, he would be with his cameras, be up at 2, 3 in the morning doing his paperwork, be out at 5:30 to get the sunrise pictures, because he knew he could sell those pictures at some point.
Assignments regularly took Mo and his crew to some of the most dangerous places on the planet. From Britain's attempts to shore up its empire in the late 1960s to the long-running conflicts in South Sudan and Somalia.
I was doing about 3, 4 trips into Somalia in a week. At one point I thought, hang on, I'm not functioning at all. I can't feel anything. And I went to the doctors and says, you are so stressed out. Your BP is completely wrong. It's too high. So I got home and I called Mohammed, and I said to him, I've been told blood pressure is too high. I'm stressed out. I need to take a break for a week. And I've been given medication and told not even to drive. And Mohammed said to me, that's rubbish. What do you mean you've got stress? That's a white man's disease.
As well as across Africa, assignments took Mo to the Middle East and Asia.
My contacts in Pakistan are invaluable at every level, especially the armed forces. They are still the people who make things happen in that country.
But while the thrill of getting the story was supreme for Mo, for his young family, left home alone, there were challenges.
He was an absent father. I actually hardly ever saw him, because he would be on the road probably 7 or 8 months of the year. So I never really got to see him.
His work was his life. nothing mattered. Nothing mattered except his work. From the beginning, I knew that I'm going to be lonely all my life.
Then in 1984 came an assignment that was to change Mo and his family's lives forever. He was commissioned by BBC Television to travel to northern Ethiopia, where there'd been reports of a famine. The BBC's Michael Burke was the reporter. Until then, access to the region had been blocked by the country's ruler, Mengistu Haile Mariam. For 6 months, Mo negotiated for permission to film. And finally, thanks to his contacts, this crew got in.
It's one story that really has shaken me. I have seen a lot of horrors, wars, executions in the past, which has never bothered me, but I feel here is a situation where people are dying simply because there is no food, something we take for granted in our normal lives.
Among the hungry thousands who gathered here in 1984 was Gebra Maiden.
People had to carry the bodies. How did they move all the bodies?
ያዛ ሰውዬ ንቃት በጣም የበረታ ነው ሰመኛለ ከዛ ኮረራ ምናምን የሚሉትን በሽተኞች ከዛ ነበረበት ህፃናት ደግሞ ከዛ መሰብሰቢያ ቦታ ነበር ከዛ ይመጣል ከዛ መጥቶ እነሱን ያነሳልና ይሄ እንደዚህ ያለ ካለም ዝም ብሎ ነው የሚያነሳ ጁንም አይጸየፍበትም ያሰውዬ ሰናለና ከዛ ልጆችም ጉድ ይራሱ ሲሄድ ጊዜ ከዛ ይከታተል አሁን ከዛ በተስካን ተሰርታለች
Mo and Michael Burke returned to Nairobi to edit the footage before sending their report to London.
He came to the office and he was looking at it and there were tears in his eyes. When do you cry? When your heart becomes soft, then you want to cry. So it affected him.
I don't feel happy doing assignments like these. I don't think anybody can feel happy going and filming people dying. But in the business that we are in, I feel myself that by actually going there and recording the events that are taking place, this is going to get the message across.
Mo's images were broadcast on BBC Television News in October 1984. The response was unprecedented. Among those who'd seen the news broadcast was Irish singer-songwriter Bob Geldof. He mobilised musicians in Britain and Ireland to record a song to raise money to relieve the famine. American artists quickly followed suit. Next came Live Aid, simultaneous charity concerts in the UK and America. They're estimated to have raised more than $200 million and helped save some 2 million lives. The world wanted to see the man whose images had inspired the event. Mo found himself mixing with some of the most famous and influential people on the planet. And awards and acclaim poured in.
For the Ethiopian famine, he received dozens of international television awards at different festivals. He won a BAFTA, which is probably one of the biggest, the Royal Television Society, a Monte Carlo Award, dozens and dozens in almost every continent on earth. He was honored. A lot of people have commented that it did make him a little bit more arrogant than he was, but he had a big ego anyway, and so if you add fuel to that ego's fire, the ego became much bigger.
1984 famine story, it did good to him, but I don't know, it changed him also very much. He became very, very, very famous. But then my life went down because very, very pretty women were falling in love with him. I don't blame him. So I just kept my mouth shut and he was doing whatever he wanted to.
The worldwide impact of Mo's images had other consequences too.
It did serve to save millions of lives because the international community responded very quickly and very generously to the famine. Now, in terms of negative impact, that image was indelibly imprinted on the minds of many people. And so for many people, Ethiopia became the poster child of famine in Africa.
The images had moved the world. It's hardly surprising that they affected the man who captured them too.
Pre-Ethiopia, 1984, a story was a story for him to get in first, out first, with the exclusive pictures, and forget about and move on to the next story. Ethiopia and the famine fundamentally changed him because he started caring about a story.
It is my responsibility in the little way that I have the ability or the access to continue telling the world what is happening and to continue reminding that the problem hasn't gone away.
Mo had only just turned 40 and years more of scoops and exclusives seemingly spread out before him. But events as dramatic as those in any story he'd ever covered were soon to happen in his own life and change things forever.
The way he took it was incredible. He was a very, very tough guy.
I think I've only seen Mohammed crying once.
I think he got a sense of his own mortality.
Most people were, I think, a little too scared, so I presume he's a very brave man.
He must have thought, I'm going to get a great story out of it.
In 1985, many of the West's most popular musicians came together for Live Aid, simultaneous charity concerts in the UK and America. They're estimated to have raised more than $200 million towards relieving a devastating famine in Ethiopia and helped save some 2 million lives. These images were the inspiration. They were captured by Mohamed Amin, described as Africa's greatest photojournalist. The coverage won Mo, as he became known, numerous awards. But no sooner had the applause died down than he was back on the road, on his relentless quest for a scoop and to outdo his rivals.
Journalism is a Darwinian vocation. only the fittest actually survive. And Mohamed Amin, he knew how to survive. And he knew he was really the fittest.
I think he was brilliant, he was genius. But you always say, no, that genius people have got some fault. There was some fault in him.
People thought he was the guy who knows it all. People thought he was a guy who would always try and dodge paying this or paying that, right? I came across very many people who said to me, how did you manage to work with him? And my answer back is, I would have gone through 10 years of media school. I would never have picked up what I picked up from him.
Ethiopia had been the scene of the biggest story of Mo's career. In 1991 came another assignment to the country that was again to change his life. It took him to the capital, Addis Ababa, where a coalition of rebel groups was about to overthrow the country's ruler, Mengistu Haile Mariam. Mo rode into town on the rebels' leading tank, filming the joy that followed Mengistu's fall. As always, he was determined to be the very first cameraman with the story, whatever it took.
There was only a couple of them there. It was him for Viz News, Gary Stryker for CNN. Now, they were all filming, but they couldn't get the material out. Dad organized for a plane to come in from Nairobi with Michael Burke and Colin Blade of the BBC. So when this plane came in and these guys got off, he gave his stuff to the pilot. And Gary came along and also gave his package to the pilot. Dad threw his tapes out of the plane and said, you know, this is my plane. Nobody else gets their material out. And so he was ruthless when it came to the field.
But while Mo once again got his scoop, this Ethiopian assignment was to have terrible consequences for him and his crew. In the early hours of June the 4th, a massive explosion lit up the sky above Addis. Mo filmed the blast from his hotel balcony. And after dawn broke, the team set off to discover its cause. They came upon a massive ammunition dump that had been left behind by the Mengistu regime. But then, soundman 34-year-old John Mathai was killed instantly in the blast. Mo had been walking beside him. His left arm was ripped to shreds and his life was in the balance.
Obviously the city was at siege. It was a city at war. So the medical facilities were almost non-existent. He was taken into the local hospital there. He was stabilized a little bit, given a drip, but there was not any care that would have helped him survive. I think he would have died had they not been able to get him out of Ethiopia and back to Nairobi.
He came at night and he was admitted to hospital, Nairobi hospital, and he was operated and he lost his arm.
And then, again, the irony is, 2 days later, he asked for all his mail to be sent to the hospital. Without his arm, the other one still bandaged, and all sorts of other injuries. You walk into his hospital room, and he's there with his mail, going through his mail, dictating letters to his secretary, and...
He was hospitalized for, I think, 2-3 days. Then after that, he just came to the office and started working. He was also driving. He came from the hospital driving a Land Cruiser with one arm.
The way he took it was incredible. I mean, no ordinary man can take it. He was a very, very tough guy.
When I had my accident, I was advised by my friends, family, relatives that, you've done your bit and it's time to slow down. It's time to take a break. You don't need anything. I mean, I'm wealthy enough to pay my bills and to live in the same style as I live at the moment, which is not much of a life because I spend most of my life in the office. That I could do all that. But I don't. I'm not interested. I mean, I lost my arm, and I immediately, when I got out of the hospital, I tried and get back to the work that I love.
Mo's determination to get back to the work he loved took him to a clinic in Ohio, America, where work was being done on battery-operated prosthetic limbs. No sooner had an arm been made for him than he was practicing how to operate his camera. Within 3 months of having the arm fitted, he was again working as a news cameraman. He was now as famous as many of the dignitaries he filmed.
How are you?
I'm very
Nice
well.
to see you.
Good to see you too, sir.
You fitting well now?
I'm fitting well. I've got a new arm now, and I can sort of.
How mobile is it?
It's fairly mobile. I mean, I can rotate my wrist in either direction in the right ground.
Well, it's nice to see you back. I hope we're not making it too hard for you.
Thank you very much. I can grip as I like. See? Okay, you put your hand in there. Okay. Is it hard?
Oh, it's hard.
Does it hurt?
Yes, it's okay.
So what do you want me to do? I can't release now.
He could press buttons and the arm moved around and he could still use it. To me, his sense of humor extended even to that. He was coming to show me his artificial arm, and he was showing me a new toy. The way a child is very proud of his new toy, he was so proud of his arm.
He was a bit mischievous about this. In fact, he told me that once he had gone into his bank in London with a cheque, and he held the cheque in his hand and put it through the thing to the young lady teller, and then spun the cheque round, whereupon the teller fainted. And Mohamed was a bit taken aback by this and had to apologise to the young lady and to the bank manager.
Getting back to work involved Mo in a range of ventures. After the loss of his arm, he chose increasingly to concentrate on still photography and on showcasing the beauty of the continent he loved.
He was best known for his coverage of hard news, which, traditionally is bad news. Famines, wars, coups, dictators. But that was not the Africa that he loved. It was not the Africa that he knew. He wanted to show the positive side of the continent, the positive stories. So he did two things. One is he published over 75 coffee table books on the beauty, people, culture, flora and fauna of this continent. The second thing that it did is founded a show called Africa Journal.
The next crucial thing, and in fact the most important thing, is do we actually have a program? And that's where all of you come into that We are going to have to put in a lot of effort to try and get the program not only off the ground, but actually to sustain it once we are up and running.
Hello and welcome to Africa Journal.
18 years on, the show's mix of news, culture, sport and innovations has audiences all over the continent. Another event that took Mo away from his hard news beat was the Safari Rally, an annual road race through some of Kenya's toughest terrain. Perhaps not surprisingly, the event's speed and competitiveness drew him. It was also a rare occasion for family time, for his son Salim loved to come too. Like most of the drivers, Mo checked out the route on a practice run before the race began. It was an extra chance for him to get the best pictures possible.
Mohamed came to my desk and said, "What do you think of those?" And I looked at these pictures and I said, "These are wonderful." And they were. They were wonderful pictures. They showed the cars with dust flying everywhere and elephants in the background with their ears flapping and their trunks up in the air and whatnot. And they were tremendous. I said, "They're fantastic, Mohamed, fantastic. Now tell me when you took them, because you didn't take them today." And he looked at me and said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Because the thing is just flagged off. The route is nowhere near any elephants. So when did you take them?" So rather shamefaced, he said, does that mean you're not going to use them?" I said, "Of course I'm going to use them, but I'm just not going to say in the caption that they were taken today." And we did use them. We used them right across the front page and it gave our front page tremendous impact.
Despite Mo's brave face, the loss of his arm had a profound effect on him. And though he hid his suffering, the wound was extremely painful.
I think if it had been like a huge scar somewhere that you could show off and say, you know what, I've been through the wars and here I am. But losing an arm, I think was a bit too much. And many people will say this. It made him a bit more angry, I think. Maybe a bit more determined.
He was getting frustrated because he didn't have the arm. But he was not showing it at all. He just didn't want to leave his work. He wanted to carry on what he was doing.
After he lost his arm, I think he got a sense of his own mortality. I think he thought he was immortal before the explosion in Ethiopia. He thought he was never going to die because he had survived so much that I think he really did think he was immortal. He was not going to die.
A couple of years later, there was another reminder that life does not go on forever. 4 journalists, all well known to Mo, were stoned and beaten to death in the Somali capital, Mogadishu. They were British-American photographer Dan Eldon, Kenyans Anthony Macharia and Hos Minor, and Hansi Kraus from Germany.
I think I've only seen Mohamed cry once, and that was in '93, when our friends were killed in Somalia. And he came up to me and he said, "You know what, there's been an accident in Somalia, and I think these guys have been killed." That's the one time I saw him with tears in his eyes. So yes, I think he was afraid of something.
Dan will never be forgotten by those.
At a memorial service for Dan Eldon, Mo paid tribute to his colleague.
Sound, sound the clarion, fill the 5. Throughout the sensual world proclaim, one crowded hour of glorious life is worth an age without a name.
Little could Mo have imagined that his own end was so near. A year later, however, there was cause for celebration. The marriage of Salim to his long-standing girlfriend Fazana. When the festivities kicked off, Mo was, as so often, away on a job.
He wasn't in town, and actually we didn't quite know when he was arriving. While all the music and dancing and everything was going on, all of a sudden, sort of out of the darkness, emerged these suitcases, followed by this figure with his sleeve tucked into his blazer and kind of wandering in, completely bewildered as to what are all these people doing in my house, why is there music and dancing, and then it dawning on him that, oh yeah, my son's getting married. I don't think he quite understood the concept of having fun and dancing and things like that. It was completely alien to him. It just wasn't something that he had ever done, and I don't think he was very interested in it, didn't know how to react. He lasted about 10 seconds and then he left. I think he was lonely in the sense that he was so used to his own company that I don't think he was very comfortable around a lot of people. He had a lot of acquaintances, he knew a lot of people, but he hadn't made many great friends in his life.
Within 2 years of the wedding, Salim and Fazana were looking forward to the birth of their first baby. But Mo was not to see his grandchild. On Saturday, November the 23rd, 1996, he and journalist and business colleague Brian Tetley were at Addis Ababa International Airport on their way home from a business trip. They checked in on Ethiopian Airlines flight ET961 to Nairobi. Mo, who published the airline's in-flight magazine, sat in first class. Brian was in business. But the flight was not to reach its destination.
I asked Salim, I said, is your dad already back? He hasn't called us. So he said, no, Mom, he hasn't called me also. And then I came home, and one of Salim's friend, he tells me that the Ethiopian airline, which was coming from Addis to Nairobi, has been hijacked and crashed in Comoro Islands. Then I opened the television, and it was in the television.
The plane had been taken over by 3 Ethiopians seeking political asylum and crashed when it ran out of fuel. Mo was apparently trying to negotiate with the hijackers and thwart their plans before the plane hit the water.
I saw Mohamed Amin come out twice the cabin to the passenger compartment in economy class and talk to some of us to try to assist him or to stand up against the hijackers, but most people were, I think, a little too scared, so I presume he's a very brave man.
He was that sort of a person, because he must have thought that if I survive, I'm going to get a great story out of it. Great story out of it if he will survive.
In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, it was unclear how many of the 175 passengers and crew on board were alive.
Still, we had very much hope, because always in this sort of situation, always Amin comes out.
Reuters then arranged the charter of a flight from Wilson Airport to the Comoros. And we kept listening in and hearing updates throughout that flight. It was a long flight. It was 5.5 hours. It was a long flight in a small plane. And I thought, okay, things are good, because if they are survivors, the chances are he would be amongst them. But it wasn't to be.
In a career spanning 4 decades, Mo had covered almost every major news story in Africa. He'd risked his life, won awards, and moved the world. Aged just 53, he was one of 125 people who died in the plane crash, including the hijackers. But though his days of making news himself were at an end, his contribution to journalism was far from over.
Underneath that, move down to the next street, we're actually changing all the way to
In 1998, the Mohamed Amin Foundation was established. Its key element, a television and film school, better known as MoForce.
One of the things that he always wanted to do in his life was to set up a training school that would be a center of technical excellence for African journalists. He felt that African journalism got a raw deal from the rest of the world. And one of the main things that people criticized was the technical quality of the work that African journalists produced. And we got an opportunity to set it up after he died. And so far, almost 200 students have graduated from the foundation, and many have gone on to become really, really good in their fields.
And you guessed it, he's from Kenya, Peter Mumirimi, Kenya.
Peter Murimi, now an independent filmmaker, graduated from the school in 2001. 3 years later, he won the CNN African Journalist of the Year award for his very first documentary.
It has everything to do with Mohamed. Because of the school, there are a number of people right now who are very passionate about this continent, who are passionate about the news. And I think through us trying to tell the African story, the African way, this is his legacy, like it's living right now.
CameraPix, the company Mo launched, has also continued to grow and has now expanded to include A24 Media. The archive he founded is the largest resource of its kind in Africa. With 4 million still images and 8,000 hours of film and video footage, it charts the history of the continent from the 1960s. At the helm of the company today is Salim Amin, who works from the desk that was once his father's.
My whole office is like a museum to him. We have a cross given by Pope John Paul II to him. We have Idi Amin's epaulets, as well as the eagle that used to sit in Idi Amin's living room. I have obviously a lot of his awards. I've even got his arm, you know, one of his arms, that he had 2 false arms. One was the one that he used most of the time, the other was a spare. So I have one of them in my office. The second arm is in the Frontline Club in London. That forms part of their displays. So yeah, we have, I mean, it really is a bit of a museum and for me a source of constant inspiration.
walk into here and I look at all the stuff around here, the photos, all his various awards and certificates and everything, I miss talking to him. Yeah. I miss talking to him because he was like a father, somebody who brought you up and actually managed to bring out almost, I would say, almost the better side of me.
I felt very bad that I have lost him. When we were together, I mean, he gave me a heaven. He gave me everything.
He died too young, of course, but the way in which he died, arguing with the hijackers at the cockpit, trying to resolve the situation as the plane plunges into the ocean, I think myself and I think we thought it was written. It was the final scene of the screenplay of Mohammed's life.
He would have wanted to go that way probably, at the center of the biggest news story of the day, headline news, front page of every paper. You know, he would have wanted to go out that way if he had been able to choose.